Okay, so kids are doing well. Tell me how you're doing.
So I think I did it, Robin. I broke through.
Okay,
I
so
did it.
so can you
I
tell?
can explain how.
Okay.
After our last session was actually the first time that I started to Google like eating disorders and what that means and kind of like I saw the video that you just recently posted, but that was sort of where I had
The one
gone, and
in
then I
hold
had
on, the
just
one in Patreon? Are you talking about the consult that I just posted?
the video with the woman, Jamil. I'm not sure who she is, but she appears to be like an actress or something.
Oh,
On
yeah.
your Patreon
I
account.
did. Doesn't that? She did a great job articulating certain things.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
loved it.
even see that whole video because I just saw that it went through, but that was kind of just on a humanitarian level. I would say that I began to understand that I just didn't agree with it all. And then went into sort of like confronting my own willfulness and all of this kind of stuff and went through the surrendering process. So, yeah, it was pretty amazing when I look back over the past couple weeks, kind of the progression, because I was definitely went through that whole anger and what I would call, somebody once called it like impotent rage. It's like impotent rage. And anyway, kind of went through releasing that willfulness and getting back to the heart of the whole thing, which for me also, because I had been kind of church, I also had to confront wanting to run back to church because that was like a big thing for me. So I had to also go through a surrendering process of just being okay without needing to like pigeonhole myself again.
Well, or using a shield. So what you're describing, tell me if I'm
hear you very well.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but what you're describing is the impulse to shield yourself with some type of something other than yourself, right? So
right. So I had to continue the surrendering process for me personally. It went to that.
It's amazing. Don't you think that's amazing how religion is so tied? At least it was for me. It's not for everybody. And there's actually research to show that it's not religion, it's fear-based concepts, right? Where it's conceptualized ideas of what God is, and then the more constraints and conditions you have to meet to feel connected to God, the more likely you are to have an eating disorder. So when you have a spiritual belief system that allows you this unconditional connection to God without all the rules, regulations, you have to do this, you have to do that, you're actually less likely to have an eating disorder. Did you know that?
Yeah,
there's research out there. Yeah, so it's the conditional, fear-based, constrained, all the conditions, all the you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this to reach this concept. There's more likely anyway. So when you in the science too, studying human behavior around that type of religiosity and eating disorders, and the transfer when people feel they failed the religion, they transfer their need to have those rules, regulations, and conditions to focusing on controlling the body versus controlling the spirit, which is really fascinating to me because that's what I did. Right. And so here we are recovering from the body image, and you're now transferring back. You're just going, what other system can I rely on to protect me from my own shittiness?
Right.
Yeah, I love that you're describing too the surrendering, like it's continuous, right? It's like, well, I want to run into this. That'll make me feel better, and you've got to deny it. You have to deny it. Even if you know I could hide under that mask. It is a mask. It's fake. I'm still insecure. I'm still inadequate. I'm still sucky.
Right.
And it's a lie.
This false sense of righteousness that people begin to have in religion, and it's really just.
Well, it's that
not
narcissism,
saying that
right?
it has to be that way for everyone involved in religion. Just saying that, I don't know.
Well, many people who are seeking that external validation or external sense of belonging through religious concept, it often becomes that because they're projecting their humanness into another system. They'll do it that, people in that state of being or that state of, you could say consciousness, are going to do that with everything, not just religion. So we can sit here and blame the religion, or we can look at the humanness being projected into a belief system. The idea that I am superior to you because of this belief system is absolutely narcissism. That is survival mechanisms, right? It's just one way of surviving as social animals. To think I'm better than you, it's like, okay, now what you're doing is you're acting like a primitive animal with
putting on some sort of mask or whatever it is.
It's like competition. I'm better than you, therefore you're the one that's going to get kicked out. I'm less likely to be shunned if I'm better than you. And so there's that benefit we get from that idea of being better than others. They're wrong, I'm right. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
I know more than you.
You're just hiding under this shell, hoping no one notices you. You're almost like, maybe I'll look like I fit in or something.
Yeah, well, that's a mechanism. That's just as primitive, right?
Right.
And we shouldn't necessarily shame those mechanisms. They are actually functional in certain environments.
Yes, but I will say that when I got to that place of surrender and really, I would just, I heard somebody once describe it as the smile in the heart kind of feeling, just sort of merging with that and being just okay and getting to that place has been so amazing, to experience and just live life from that place instead. So it's definitely worth getting rid of whatever willfulness there is to want to stay small or whatever.
Well, or conform. You're conforming to something that isn't true. So we can simplify this and say, if you are holding a lie about yourself, you're going to suffer. Because it requires the work. It requires the hiding. It requires changing yourself. It requires this constant, it's a lot of work, right? We're going to simplify it all. We're simplifying this whole thing. You're holding on to a conceptual lie and you're identifying it's a lie. The truth of it is, if you were to remain autonomous, independent, just as you are, no protection, no inflating yourself, no, lying, no hiding, no defending yourself, right? No arguing, excusing what's going on. If you just are.
Right.
Now you're free from all of the, unintended consequences, the work, the obsessing, the hiding, the insecurity. You're here, because if you're okay with what is true,
right.
If you can just allow that to be, even if it is weak, even if it's not strong enough, even if it's not good enough, even if you're dumb, what if those are all true? Well, in just existing with them and allowing that to be, in effect, you're having the courage, and it's almost like it becomes good enough.
Right, yeah.
I don't know about, and then you can just rely on it. That's where you get into the heart, right? You get into the heart because it's truthful. Because if you can tell the truth, at least you're free.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a certain pridefulness that comes with hanging on to positionalities that aren't even serving you.
Well, they do serve something. They do serve something.
The lesson, I suppose. But.
Well, they serve the idea that they kind of give you the illusion you're safe, right? Having a position, you could say, is evolutionarily, it serves the survival need to feel safe, because if I have a position, I'm right. that makes someone else wrong. There's been studies on the brain in that idea of confirmation bias and the narcotic pleasure we get from it. So there is some evolutionary need for confirmation bias, even though it's actually really, in truth, in reality, it's hurtful, right? Because it's basically your ignorance to the truth is basically kind of keeping evolution down, right? Yeah. Repressing, it's actually stagnating, improvement to humanity, having this confirmation bias. But we get pleasure out of it. And they assume that pleasure, that dopamine narcotic reaction to thinking we're right, actually serves that primitive need to feel safe in a tribe. So it's very tribal. To make others wrong, right? So in this process, again,
which is ironic because forgiveness and actually like kind of coming together creates actually a better sense of community at the end of the day when both people can be honest.
You're correct. Well, yeah, that's the truth, but that requires humility and the willingness to admit failure. And again, that failure is relative to that egoic concept of rightness. It'd be like that goes against our primitive nature, right? To say, you're right. Maybe I'm not strong enough. That's like saying, and if that is the truth, I'm willfully willing to be shunned and abandoned and left into the wilderness, which is how our brains have evolved.
Yeah.
Right? So that humility, I'm willing to be left. I'm willing for my husband to leave me. I'm willing for my family to reject me. Goes against our primitive brain. Our primitive brain would say, no, you're gonna die. You're a sucky piece of shit. You can't handle it. You can't handle it. And that's where you go, well, maybe I need to go to a religion. That'll help me feel good. That'll help me feel safe. It'll give me some guidance, right? Because I need it for when I go into the wilderness.
Oh, my goodness.
Right? So, but you could say, well, but the big issue here, you could say the reason why you're coming out of the closet as a real person, as a truthful person that living from the heart, is because you don't want to suffer anymore from the consequences of living inauthentically, of living conformed. There's so much suffering that you had along the way. It wasn't all horrible. It got that way. Eventually, it builds and builds and builds and builds. And eventually you're held hostage living it with depression, right?
Right, yeah.
Losing your mind.
Right. It's like trying to conform to, and the box keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller as you can't breathe anymore.
Well, because life gets so much more dynamic and changes and movable and complex, You go from being a teenager where things are fucking easy.
Right.
You're holding on to the belief system that worked well when you were 20, 19, 18, 16, it's like when you were, or under circumstances, if you're older, that are like, well, you had the money, you had the house, you had a husband who did all that, but eventually you see that's irrelevant as well. You're still not happy. It's really a matter of getting back to that freedom, right? Freedom. Yeah. And people assume, well, when I sit in the box, I'm free. Well, are you really? What are you free? What are you free from? I'm free from dying. Well, you're going to die whether you're in the box or not. It always ultimately comes down to the threat of you're going to die. Or you're going to fail, which ultimately symbolizes dying, right? Symbolic. You may not think of it as death, but the brain is responding with fight or flight, which means it really comes down to the primitive idea of rejection symbolizes death, failure. Failure symbolizes your inferiority. Inferiority symbolizes rejection. Rejection ultimately symbolizes being alone. Being alone equates to you're going to die because you don't feel that you can handle being alone. You cannot handle it. So think of those, how our brains are so primitively wired that way. So our nature is to deny being wrong. Our nature is to deny all that. And so when it comes down to you being alone, autonomous, independent, what's the word? It's like being a free agent.
Right.
That inner belief that you can't handle it you have to face that. And that's
Right.
what you're describing is I had to face that. My instincts were to bolt, leave, hide,
Right.
shrink, all of those real primitive feelings. And it feels like you're going to die. Did you experience that? Like, it's impending doom. It is impending doom. And it feels like the Grim Reaper is literally sitting on your throat. Dark, heavy, burdensome. And those are the moments people are running away from through smoking cigarettes, watching porn, going shopping, fixating on the body, trying to lose weight, focusing on your food. You're trying to escape that kind of feeling of pressure that underneath is actually an ominous sense of death. Some people never even allow it, so they don't even know that's there. They're constantly running and hiding and running and hiding and studying and running and hiding. I would say to them, hey, underneath all this is a feeling of death. They go, no, there's not. I'm like, okay, well, stop coping and then tell me what's underneath all that, because you're coping. You have all these coping mechanisms, repressing it. Why are you OCD? Why are you all or nothing? Why are you a perfectionist? What's underneath that perfectionism? Because that perfectionism is a lot of work that represents survival mode. What's underneath survival mode? What's underneath your radicalized religious concept? What would happen if that went away? Who are you now? What happens if you don't have your thinness and the body you have has real actual problems, looking at body image religion. Anyway, so going underneath that. So for you to have gotten to this space, when you're talking about surrendering all of it, it had to have come up. That kind of like ominous, dark.
For me, it felt more like I always related to like a dragon or like some kind of, I definitely felt all that. And
you did nothing about it.
I just knew I was going to be okay without having to conform. Or I had to make the decision that I didn't have to conform to be okay, and that I was just, whatever I will give up because of not conforming is okay with me too, kind of thing.
Well, because if you conform, you have to suffer. You have to keep on suffering. That's like saying, I either conform to hide, which means I have to keep on hiding. The feeling will always be there still because I am compensating for it. I'm doing something about it, right? I either continue to do something about it, which means it'll be here, I do something. I be here, I'll do something. Does that make sense? Or I do nothing. I lose, right? I lose people's respect. There's always that, again, people will think I suck. I lose this sense of safety, which is actually really harmful and not safe, but it feels safe at the time.
Yeah. And I think for me, somehow just that like humanitarian awareness, like diet should come with a label, sort of like gambling does. They'd be like, if you have a problem with dieting, please call.
Oh, you are so right on. And at some point it would be awesome, but that'll never happen. It's such a huge industry. I take that back, if cigarettes and gambling.
That would be really nice. There should be like a warning label on diets.
Well, and on religions too. It's like, warning, if you are seeking a sense of being better or feeling better about yourself, this might not be the best option because you're kind of latching on to some coping mechanism. Yeah. Well, the problem is the science of our brains and our kind of evolutionary psychology and our cognitive science of how we are cognitively it's pretty amazing what's out there and what these scientists are studying and how they're doing it. It's just, it's not in our the books. It's not in education yet, learning about our animal self and how we self-destruct and how we can look at history.
I think it's also really easy to believe the lie that you're not okay, like whatever that lie is that society sort of, to internalize that and not question it, like that whole belief system.
No,
kind of thing.
I would agree. Because there is that inherent feeling that we have inside us that there's risk of death, right? The risk of dying, that we're wired to focus on. And so there's the belief in that you need protection really comes from, if you think about it, our parents.
Right.
Comes from our friends' parents. It comes from everybody that says that's dangerous, don't do it, and there's a benefit to that. The downside is you're saying you can't handle it every time. You're essentially saying you can't handle that. You can't handle that. You can't handle that either. And what you're really saying is, as a mom, I'm projecting onto you that I can't handle it. And I just,
So crazy. When you start to see it from the other side, it almost looks like really small. Like it doesn't, like I don't even feel like that much of an attachment to all of these issues anymore. Because like once you kind of move into that heart space, you're just so happy to be there. You could almost care less about what you went through.
Well, you see it as so.
You're just like happy again, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's free. You're describing freedom from survival mode. If you want to really pull yourself out and see it, if you've done this, if you kind of faced death, you've transcended that survival mechanism. So it no longer really has. It can't manipulate you so easily. Because you're not afraid of rejection and abandonment anymore. You're kind of now have perspective to weigh rejection and abandonment with suffering. Like you have the option at this point, where before you didn't, because rejection and abandonment and disapproval was so like not an option. You didn't have an alternative but to suffer. So once you face, that primitive social aspect of our survival, which took millennia to evolve to be there, which means we're not going to get rid of that unless you desensitize it. The way you desensitize it is by facing death, death by rejection, death by being inferior, being insignificant, not being special. It's like taking that narcissistic core of the ego and ignoring it, or just not giving it power. Once you do that, it's like the brain changes. It's like your brain chemistry changes because that...
It did feel like that.
It does. I swear, it did for me. And I've never gone back. It's like, it's almost...
No, because to me, it feels somewhere between like a Hallmark card and being like 10 years old again.
Yes. It's very loving, right?
It feels good. And for me, I think it felt like confronting my own willfulness. Like that was when I had that moment and just, like it was still a moment with God, but then I also didn't get into the religiosity of it. So
yeah, well, it's whatever God is versus the concept.
Grace and everything that,
I think that it's like there's a moment. I don't know. You tell me, because we're not really going into that specifically, into that space, other than you at some point were very surrendered, and it was willful surrender. It wasn't for me. I don't want to do it.
I did, because I had to get past that for me stage.
That's a big one.
I did have to recognize that, and then I just had to spend like days, kind of just crying, almost in more of like a relief. Just sort of like
the end of war
away kind of thing.
I describe it as it is the end of war. It's like it's peaceful. It's like the end of a storm. The storm has passed. It's not blissful rainbows and happiness and unicorns so much in that space. It's like divorce. It's like the end of war. And so there is this calm, destructive sense to it. Like there's been complete and total collapse.
Right, just what? Yeah, I definitely did go through that.
So here's what I want to mention this. This is something I have described over and over and over again. You have to have humility. You're going to go through this. It's going to feel like that. There's a point at which you're going to feel sorry for yourself. It's that victim position. That has to be surrendered, because that ultimately is you're fighting for what you used to do. Feeling sorry, you have to let go of all that shit that you hated, but yet you used, so that you have to surrender that. So none of my descriptions, even though I'm describing it and saying, here's what it's going to feel like, the ominous sense you're going to die, it's going to feel like some form of dismemberment. It's like a murder instead of like,
Yeah.
because if it was just dying, that's different than I'm being murdered. It's like being attacked. So there is an outside source that has to be surrendered to, not an inside source. It's an outside source, which is, it's like you have to experience it to then go, oh yeah, I could have heard you say that. I could have read it in a book, but until I actually experienced it, I didn't understand it. It
Right.
took experiencing it. So my point is, what was it? Because it with each and every client I work with, my goal is to get you to this place. I'm just a guide on the outside saying, turn right, turn left.
Well,
You're going in circles. You're going in circles. Go this way. Try that. You're the one who has to do it. You're the one who has to sit there completely limp, completely surrendered, white flag. As you feel like you're getting murdered, you have to surrender and say, if this is what is meant to be, I accept it willfully. What brought you to that? There had to have been, because
there actually was. The last time we talked, and I think in our conversation I forgot to mention or whatever, but I had actually, and you knew though, I had been trying to sort of eat healthy or whatever.
Yes, that was a good session.
I actually, of course, gained weight. And so, and then we had our session, and we hadn't even really talked about that one aspect, but I started looking into, like, Googling eating disorders, which was the first time I'd ever actually looked at it. And I knew I had to surrender. I had to lay down this thing. Like, I just couldn't live this way anymore. It's not working. Like, I am being just beyond ridiculous.
Okay, I have a question.
So I had to
Okay, I have a real quick question.
Place.
Okay, good. What did you question and I don't care if you say yes or no. I just want to know, what's the block that you were questioning if I was credible?
No, I think it was my own, what I would call like a childish willfulness to hold on to what you wanted. Like, you don't,
Okay, so by going to the internet and looking up eating disorder stuff, which you all should, there's some crap out there, and there's some good stuff out there, and there's some new stuff that's in the mix. But by doing that, that was like saying, no, she's right, I have to do this.
Well, I began to understand it from, like, when I saw how many millions of people, like, actually have eating some sort of, and I saw it almost like from a humanitarian point of view.
Yes.
And then I was just able to connect that I just had to let this go. I don't agree with it. Look what it, I saw what it did for me, and I just knew. And then I went through the process of the surrender, and then
because you have to let go of what you get out of it.
Let go of the victim role of actually hanging on to some ridiculous concept that you think is somehow your answer in life or whatever,
or keeping you safe. So I want you to visualize this as like you just left a cult.
Right.
That's what just happened. You think of it, visualize yourself in like a tribe, living in tents or living in this community, that this is the whole purpose and this is what you're going to do and this is how you're going to feel better about yourself. And they'll look at her, and you literally just left with your fat body and said, I'd rather be fat.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that simple. That is a syndrome. It's called Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
That's why you so rapidly recover. It's so rapid. It's almost instantaneous the moment you do it. The moment you make those choices, because those are choices. And I loved a little bit ago, if you rewind this, you're going to hear her say, I had to make this choice. Yes, it's a choice.
Yeah.
What you're doing is a choice.
I did. And then when I made the choice, I definitely had to experience the anger of letting it go. There was definitely that willfulness. Yeah,
that's the animalness. That's your ego, rage. There's blame. There's then there's like, you suck. You're not going to be able to do it. There's all these threats that come up, right?
Right. And it was funny because when I finally got to the place where I was willing to surrender, I was met with so much just like, I felt just, I I don't know. All I can kind of describe it as like the smile in the heart. There's like this feeling, and then I knew that the storm had passed.
Yeah.
It's okay, and everything's going to be okay from now on.
Yeah. So this I describe as the moment you came out of the closet. It's the moment you told the truth. You told the truth. That feeling of release. I told the truth. It's a feeling of, no matter what the response, I don't have to hide anymore. I don't have to do anything. It's like telling the truth. That's what you're describing right now, is the moment you accepted reality.
Right.
It feels like it's like I don't know if I've ever gone through the visual of the white room with you, where I say you're going to be buck ass naked. Have you heard me describe that with someone else?
I don't know, but yeah.
It's very powerful, because it's like coming out of the closet with a fat body, with all your failures, and letting everybody see it without excuse, without telling people how you're going to fix it. You're just basically coming out as a flawed piece of shit. And and everybody sees it. Once everybody sees it and has all the judgments they can make about it and all the stories you let them have, what happens?
Well, I think the surrender, it's just like, okay, well now you just feel healed.
Yeah.
And so
every time I have this one of my favorite quotes is, I've kept this for years. It's like, here's part of it. Telling the truth when we feel vulnerable is one of the hardest things to do. We might fear rejection, abandonment, disapproval, disappointment, rage, hurt, or just the raw exposure that's an unavoidable part of the process. Yet almost every time we're willing to tell a hard truth, we grow, and that means willing to be rejected, abandoned, disapproved of. You're willing. That's the willingness to be disappoint people, willingness to make people angry or whatever they think. We grow and deepen in presence no matter the response, no matter what they do, whether it's praise or rejection. There's like this, it doesn't matter. You're not doing it for either. You're doing it to release yourself from the burden of having to pretend otherwise. The energy that we previously locked up to maintain a false front is now free to uplift and enliven us. That's a quote from How Now, 100 Ways to Celebrate the Present Moment.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, so that's what you're describing right now.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's
the
like
peace
when
after
you
war.
allow yourself to be seen and to not judge yourself, or even if others judge you, just kind of I don't know. I'm just okay with it.
Well, you accept. You had to have, number one, let go of you let go of what you got out of the pretend self, the ego self, the conceptual self, right?
Yeah.
And you allowed the truth to manifest. We don't even know what that is. What is the truth? Yeah. We don't know, but it is in your heart. You can trust that you have a good heart, that you have good integrity, that you don't mean harm. Isn't that good enough? Isn't that good enough?
And also, when people lash out, and it kind of gives you the opportunity to, or even if they're just speaking truth, let's say, and it hurts or whatever, it still gives you the opportunity for that humility and that opportunity to forgive, like just learn like those kind of skills, I suppose. So.
Well, yeah, that's what you're describing, is just the actual function of humility, is that you don't have to be perfect. You're okay with being flawed. You can look at your choices or what you're doing and go, well, until you become aware of it, you're unaware of it. So once you're aware, you can kind of laugh at the humanness that you are, and you don't have to hide or repress that. You don't have to defend yourself, because you're okay being flawed. It's not a prideful thing. It's right. Like, I didn't know. I don't know until I know. And it's okay that I don't know everything.
Because the other thing is, when you're in that state, you like project so much blame you like do all that guilt shifting or
Yeah.
blame shifting kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you don't even realize how you're hurting other people.
Yeah.
And you're not taking into account your own actions.
No, you're trying to repress the truth by covering it up with other people as if they were to blame.
Yeah. So just like actually being willing to just look at it all and be like, okay.
Yeah, once you do it, it's almost like you should just stay in that space and just do it all the time.
Yeah,
so much
I do
easier.
feel like it's kind of, I don't know if you could go back once you get into, like, you really get into your heart space and there's no reason.
Well, you could if you go back into pride.
Right.
If you get something out of the praise, if you attach to any form of success, right? This is where in terms of body image, imagine that you lose a bunch of weight.
Right.
Now, think about that from this perspective, from where you're at right now. If your body naturally, because you're no longer going feast and famine, feast and famine, feast and famine mentality. If the body naturally on its own recovers from it, what would it require for you to go back into that smaller space?
Yeah, I just don't think I would.
I know, but what would it take? Because a lot of people do. I just want you to know.
Oh, well, I mean, I suppose if I receive some sort of celebrity status, I might feel...
You're going to attach to it.
Buy it or something.
Yeah, you're going to attach to it. And then what happens to this freedom?
I can see that there could be always more temptation to sort of like lower yourself into.
If you attach to the glamour, if you attach to any of it, right? If you claim it as your own, that's really where shit hits the fan. It does take. So yeah, you become aware. It's hard to become unaware, but that awareness comes with knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge, right? So when I did what you just did, when I went through this and I left the cult and I had a miraculous healing, because it's a syndrome that goes away within seconds, right? Because you just, I won't go back into that cult, which means I don't have the mental illness that people have inside that space.
Right.
I remember thinking I'm willing to be 500 pounds because I know I can feel the difference between that I am not the body, I'm not the 500 pounds, and I'm certainly not what people's opinion is about it. But there was knowledge around the fact that if I leave all this, likelihood that that'll happen is slim, which means my body could remain the same. I could physically still look the way I do, and I remember thinking, I just don't want to care. I don't want to care. I don't want to be identified by it. I don't want to put it on a resume. I don't care. Someone could give me a compliment and it just is great for them. It doesn't stick. It doesn't hold. There is because I see that they're complimenting me because of their conformed state of being in their cult space, right? So I realized if I... Crazy. So if I don't care either way, I will remain free. If I can adapt to all of it, meaning I'm adapting to if I get hit by a car, if I get cancer, if I lose my eyesight. I mean, think of all the physical potential in a lifetime. Right. I die early. My child dies. All of the physical life that we live. I'm going to cut myself. I'm going to potentially lose my ears. I'm going to... Who knows? Starve to death. I could die of dehydration. Whatever that is, I'm not afraid of it. Because the present moment, the present of experiencing life to me, the infinite space of potential, as I'm conscious and aware, what do I need from the body at that point? So if someone compliments the way it looks, think about how insignificant that is compared to experiencing infinite space of potential. In awareness and just consciousness that the body's providing me.
Right.
Can you imagine going back down into that tiny little space because you want someone to like you? I will never again give up that infinite space, right?
Yeah.
But it does take, that moment. So, and we are still primitive. I still have my animal brain. It's still there. I laugh at it. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's silly. You know, the feeling I get when someone attacks me is that I want to rip their eyeballs out. I want to get a freaking bazooka but you know what? It's like so primitive. And I don't have to, I can be aware that that's there. So when I'm writing this book, I have to always check in. What am I doing this for? What am I getting out of this? I always have to check the animalness inside me. What am I getting out of this? Am I looking for approval? Am I looking for status? Am I looking to be special? What am I doing? What is the heart? You come back into the heart. I'm doing this because someone out there might read it and it might make sense to them. Someone else out there might read it and it might not make sense to them. Either direction, I am not taking claim. I'm not taking claim to even if it matches with someone.
Right.
Oh my God, Robin, this is amazing. It's really just what I experienced on paper. I'm not, you see what I'm saying? So if I stay unattached to the outcomes of everything, I maintain that infinite space of freedom to change, to be. Once this book is done, do you think I'm going to continue to do this until I die? No.
Right.
I have infinite potential here. Why would I want to stay right here?
Right, yeah. And I like how it's easy, like you can come from that, obviously, that compassion and all that, and still hold your own sense of being in the heart. There's not that, when you're in your sort of, I don't know, lower self or whatever, you come from a sense of wanting to serve as if it's going to, like your do-gooder syndrome or something, like you're, you need to earn, credits in heaven or some sort of
No.
as opposed to when you get to an open-hearted space and then you just have this.
Well, you're good enough in an open-hearted state. Well, to get to an open-hearted state, you have to be good enough, even with all the flaws. Right. That's often people are chasing that. They know there is that space that exists. They just think they have to earn it. They have to do good to get to that, but they don't. That's conditional. You'll never reach it. You're chasing a mirage. The only way to you do, and you have to accept everything as it is, even all the flaws, even all the shit. Even the fact that your hair isn't thick enough, your eyes don't see well enough, your parents were not very nice, you were molested as a child. You have to accept it all. Because that's accepting infinite potential.
Yeah.
So when you say that's bad, that's bad, that's bad, you're basically creating your tiny box.
Right, yeah.
You're rejecting reality. You reject it. You reject it. And the more you reject, the smaller your space gets. The more you accept, the bigger it gets. So for example, when I said in my mind, I accept being hit by a car. I could be a paraplegic. I could be 500 pounds. Think of how big my space got.
Right.
Because I was open to infinite physical potential in a lifetime, to include dying early. Early relative to whose plan? Whose plan is that? Mine? Someone else's? What's early?
Right.
Who knows? Whatever it is, I have a period of space and time here that I'm experiencing. Right? So if I say this is bad, I don't like it, I'm now creating limitation to that experience. Yeah. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, the way that I guess to me, it's sort of, I see like the internal flame in your heart, it's always there, it doesn't get extinguished, you may change forms. Death is an illusion. Like, the whole thing kind of came together as just the peacefulness to experience whatever was in front of me without attaching to it as being so permanent or such a big deal in life. This is just my current experience of what's going on, sort of thing.
What you're describing is what Maslow on Maslow's hierarchy of need says is, it's Dr. Hawkins' higher states of consciousness. So you've passed the 200 mark. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, what is Maslow? I have to look.
Maslow's is the hierarchies of need. It's a pyramid. It's the bottom need for our brain is food, water, and then shelter, environmental safety, and then the tribal need to feel belonging. I am lovable. The way I describe it is an inner sense of lovability. He believes that once those three are met, you now go into self-esteem. That's the sense that I can handle this. I can do that. You're okay with those, the capacity to handle failure. You have to have all those lower ones met before you can, your brain changes to go into the peak, which is bliss, right? Which is,
I've been feeling pretty blissful.
Yes. Okay. So he describes it as because Abraham Maslow was a scientist that studied human motivation, human behavior, and he created a theory that he visibly demonstrated in a pyramid, and it is still studied to this day, confirmed, and also evolved a little bit. So, and I've compared it to, it's very basic, and I've also compared it to Dr. David R. Hawkins' scale of consciousness. Dr. Hawkins' scale of consciousness goes from 0 to 1,000. 200 is the break point. Anything under 200 would be survival mode. Okay, so in my mind, that's like, okay, those are the lower three, Maslow's lower three: food, shelter, belonging. Under 200 is, if you look at the scale of consciousness or the map of consciousness, you really need to look at it because it's.
Yeah, I have seen the map of consciousness. I haven't looked too much at Maslow's. Like, I don't know.
Well, it's so very basic. Again, this is all just me trying to figure out a way to write about what you just went through. How did you just all of a sudden come out of mental illness like, oh, it's gone?
Yeah.
To me, it's like, okay, well, at the 200 mark, for Dr. Hawkins, it takes, courage. It took courage for you to sit when you felt like you were going to die. That takes courage. The willfulness right there. The surrendering of the pride. The humility. Yeah. So you surpass kind of those lower states of consciousness and go into truth. So anything below 200 is a lie. Everything above 200 is truth. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that would be fascinating for you to really just look into, only because you just experienced it.
Yeah. So,
it's just interesting. And you don't even need to do that at this point. Who gives a shit? You don't really need to know anything. I'm only trying to explain it.
Like, also, all of these mental, supposedly superior concepts, all of that, that whole thing that people do where they feel that superiority in the mind and just surrendering, it's not love, it's not the space of the heart, so I don't need to know.
You don't. That's the coolest part about it. When I went through this, I remember thinking there's no point to reading any books. There's no point. No, I say that around self-help books. Yeah. Because I'm not going to really understand what I need to be aware of until I become aware of it. So it's like an organic learning curve versus a forced learning curve. That's artificial. To just read something and think it's going to stick is artificial. You have to process and experience. And so it makes no sense for me and there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need help. I am where I'm at. I don't need to conform to some concept of being better than that. All of that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, getting pulled into the intellectual or the mental, it's like you can tell you've left your heart. You're now grinding your brain or something to try to figure something out.
Okay, what you're describing is if your intention is to fix something or that you have something wrong. There's nothing wrong with looking at intellect. I'm looking at intellect intensely right now. Does that mean that I'm egoic?
Yeah. That when you're trying to figure it out, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and the science around consciousness is not necessarily spiritual ego. Because you're not necessarily positioning yourself as better than someone else. That's a thought that comes from the lower brain, right? The animal brain.
Yeah, so I felt like I could see how I let that go too. That tendency that it would come up and it just felt unnatural. It didn't feel right. Yeah. I would just kind of let it go.
Well, you know what? No matter what someone else's intention or integrity is, what does that have to do with you? Nothing. And that's the beauty of it. It's no longer important, It is fascinating, however, to look at how did this happen. There are people out there who have had this experience who've actually tried to describe what that is. You're coming out of survival mode. Everybody out of survival mode functions exactly like you are. There's nothing special about it.
Right, yeah.
Nothing special. You know, that's the coolest part. When someone thinks that they're special, guess where they're actually at?
Yeah.
They're not up. They're not. They're still survival mode. It is funny.
Yeah. And to me, it was just, I definitely figured out what surrender
is.
That means.
It feels like. When I went through this, that was an awareness I had too. I had all this knowledge, right, prior to scripture knowledge, all this memorized concepts of what faith is, kindness, giving, right? I had conceptual knowledge of humility. I didn't really understand it. It was conceptualized. It was memorized. And then it was given this special superiority, right? The concept of I have faith. I don't know what the hell that was because I never actually experienced it. I never was given the opportunity to experience it until I did, right? That was the moment of full on surrender. It's not faith because I want a certain outcome. It's really faith in my mind. It was like faith is just allowing things to be whatever they are and just accepting that, you know. How do you describe that to someone who hasn't experienced it? It's very difficult, you know, but I became aware of all the concepts that I thought I knew before was actually complete ignorant. It was completely ignorant of the reality of what that is. You know, faith is the willingness to surrender completely. It's not hoping that you get what you want. There's such a difference.
Right. Yeah. I did notice faith, the word popped in my head as I was going through this, like, within the past few, or a week or whatever, but it's almost like faith in just love that it exists, that it's there and it's waiting for you, and you don't have to. I don't know how to. There does seem to be some sort of leap of faith or whatever. I guess that I'm not sure how to describe.
Your willingness to let it all be. You just willingly let it be and just accept there is an infinite. I do feel that there is a sense, and there was in me, and I didn't like the idea of God because it was so conditioned, the concept of God, right? I do remember the feeling of that if there is a God or some master planner of what's going on, I have to allow what that master plan is. I'm not going to sit here and tell it what it should be. You know, I don't know if that helps. I don't know. It really is hard to describe because it's just a feeling. There's a sense. It's like a sense.
Yeah.
It's an awareness. It's just like,
the only thing I could describe it is like the smile in the heart. I know it sounds weird or cheesy, but
no,
you just get to this place and then you're like, I found whatever it was I was looking for. I found it
with nothing.
And right, and like I just, and then you've arrived because you start to feel blissful. You like literally light up as a person. You feel alive and everything, and you just know that you know kind of thing, that you did it, and the storm passed and everything like that. So I don't know if that's what I equate to as finding, God or something. I'm not sure what the word would be, but
for me it was just allowing it to be. It was always there, right? It's always there.
The heart that's just there.
Yeah, you just never allowed it to. You didn't give it. You didn't even acknowledge it. It had no value to you. You know, it's like all of this. Everything you've experienced has always been there. It's always there. It's always been there.
I think it starts around puberty. I don't know, for women and maybe probably boys, where everything starts getting weird, because it seems like when you're, I don't know, maybe not everybody in their childhood, but, when you're a kid and you're just happy and riding your bike and
Yeah.
climbing trees and stuff, and you're just
You're just
everything
present, right? Everything
yeah.
is what it is. There's no denying it. There's no this or that. There's no state of duality, right? When you're a kid,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
all just is. You're present with everything and allowing it to be. And that changes differently for everybody. Some children are traumatized very young, and they begin to have they go into survival mode and have coping mechanisms and become very positioned because of their own nature to survive. And obviously I think junior high age is when that social construction around are you acceptable or not starts to develop. And not only that, but your sexuality, your body starts changing. And again, when you go into that university, college level where sexuality is very much a huge pressure, there's different stages, but for people, when they come out of survival mode, all of that seems trivial. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Whether you come out of it. I came out of it when I was 19, 20, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
even though it was like short, fast, and intense.
Yeah, I was going to say which part. I mean, because I think as you evolve, it was like reincarnating. So whether I died and got a new body, or whether I allowed that, spiritual death to occur, and whatever the timing is, to me, I feel fortunate it happened prior to death. Some people have these awarenesses occur as they're dying because they have to surrender their ego. It's like you're dying. What's dying? Is it me, or is it who's dying? What's dying? The body, my soul, the essence. What was I, and what was the truth? And, you start to question life, really, in the dying process. So what basically I'm saying is I didn't actually have to die physically to do it. Right. But I came so close, right? Like I could feel the space very, very, I don't know how to describe it other than a very thin veil of space that I could have just died. Just let go. Yeah. It was really bizarre, or actually very empowering to know it was a choice to stay. I had a choice. Yeah. Anyway, so that's it is a fortune. But everybody, when they get there, that's fortune. It doesn't matter how old you are. Like you are now in a space that you will never forget exists. It can go away as soon as you attach to some luxury or some benefit, right? Right. And be okay with that. That's the other thing. If it does go away, there's more you're not aware of. Right. You want to. I remember thinking this and going, I want to know sooner than later. So if it does happen, I'm going to put myself in so much vulnerability because I want to move forward with this. I want to nip it in the butt. So give me rejection now. I'm not hiding from anything. So it was very aggressive for me. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was radical truth. Because in the radical truth, I am facing all of my vulnerabilities now. Not only in my mind through the idea that I could be dismembered, die in a bomb, lose my eyesight, all that physical stuff. It's like if someone's going to reject me, I'm going to put myself in the present truth and allow it to happen now. I'm not going to pretend and then hope they don't find out who I am later. I'm going to let them know right now I'm weird. I'm probably on the spectrum somewhere. I'm dumb. I'm wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about because it's all true in some form or another. So I'm just going to live in that space. It's like living in rejection. Do it now. I'm okay with it. Right. So as soon as I'm not okay with it, right? As soon as I'm not okay with a bad review, with a client thinking I suck, I now go back down. No one is immune to that risk because we have our animal brain. We cannot remove it. It's just a matter of learning to practice humility all the time. Every time, all the time. Practice it. Practice it. Even in the moment you want to kill someone because that animal brain says you're wrong, I'm right. Practice the humility as it arises. That person cut me off. That person cut me off in the car. I'm gonna freaking honk my horn at them. Assholes! Mm-hmm. Laugh at that, right?
Yeah.
Humility.
Yes.
You live in it. It's like I used to call it, or I still call it, I live in a bubble of reality. Here's the truth. It's in my space, in my bubble of truth. As things come in that are not true, I laugh at them and let them pass. I don't hold on to it. Even if there's a benefit. Even if the benefit is I could make more money. I could have more followers. I'd rather lose the money and lose the followers and have my freedom. You just, as it arises, you surrender it. So it's basically doing what you did live. Never paused. Don't ever pause it again. Well, you might. And if you do, just know you're going to stay in pause for a while. Until you've pushed play. So I call it live. You're like living in live TV, if you want to call it that. It's like I'm no longer going to try to edit my life. Pause. Let's cut that out. Move it forward. Because that's where you get stuck. It's like now you're paralyzed. Now your progress is done. It's stopped. Because you're living this. You're trying to create an alternative to the truth.
Yeah.
So in a way, that's one way to describe where you're at. You're living live. You're on play right now. It's played. Play. Mm-hmm. It's going. And what you're saying is, okay, I'm on a map with no guidance and I can use my heart. So I'm going to do it. I'm now a free agent. I'm now living from the heart, which is the truth. Whatever that is. We can't even claim what that is because it's spontaneously occurring. You were born with it. You didn't create it, right? So the goodness you feel at the heart isn't even yours to claim.
Mm-hmm.
You can just allow it to be. Just living on play. The play button's pushed. So this life is now moving forward. You're now
That's awesome.
living it. Yeah, it's a pretty awesome feeling because you no longer have to force a story.
Yeah. And and then I just feel a lot of freedom to do just other things that are interesting. So my mind has been occupied with, other things than dieting and all that kind of stuff.
How's it feel?
You're trying to, it's funny because I feel like you almost forget where you used to be because you're so busy just living in the moment and being like, sort of blissed out or whatever. And then I forget that I used to feel really crappy all the time. But yeah, I definitely don't feel the need to worry about food and all that kind of stuff.
Can you, tell me this in 1 minute and then I gotta go.
Okay.
If you were to talk to someone listening to this who is suffering with an eating disorder, which is health,
right?
What would you tell them right now?
I would tell them to find their heart first before just put down whatever coping mechanisms and, just the way is definitely through surrender.
So there is a way out.
Everything gets better after that. So
there is a way out.
Yeah.
Recall how you felt when you were in it. Doesn't it feel like it's permanently non-escapable? There's no way out.
Right, because of the clutching. There actually has to be that, letting go.
Yeah, you're chasing your tail. Chasing your tail.
Yeah.
You have to let go of the thinness.
Sort of stop and let go. So, and, everybody's got a heart. Everybody's got that space inside of them that's sort of there. So, anyway, it's waiting.
It is waiting. It's not, you gotta.
You just need to let go. That's really all there is.
Yeah.
But
on a scale of 1 to 10, when you came to me, where were you in terms of misery? 10 being suicidal, 1 being happy.
I I was probably between a 1 and a 2.
Hold on. 1 and 2 is so you're happy.
Oh, no. Oh,
10 is suicidal.
Yeah. I was with 9 and 10. Between 9 and 10, I was low.
Would you say you were hopeless?
Yes. Yeah, I was desperate and hopeless and didn't know where. It seemed like I was at the end.
Where would you say you are today?
It's like found the door and in a whole new reality. Just a whole new space.
You didn't even know existed.
Yeah. It's infinite, potential, I suppose, but it's just wonderful. And no one should shortchange themselves from having that experience to try to stay in a box. That would be so.
We did. This is our 15th hour of work since we started.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, I gotta go.
Awesome.
I will upload this and get it back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited.